Afternoon. This is Kiana, and today we are talking about the election and a specific constituency, which is the Black American constituency. So I'm going to try and get a little bit closer because I recorded this earlier, but there was something wrong with the volume and it didn't sound. Of course, I don't have a microphone, so it's not sounding how it is supposed to sound, but we'll give it another try and see how that does it. And so, this election season, Black Americans are uh, very concerned. And so, what I did was I actually watched several focus groups, and um, uh, after watching these groups, I drew a consensus on what the issues were. So, these issues that we're going to be talking about in this video today, it doesn't reflect the entire voter constituency. Of course, Black Americans are not a monolith. They vote independently and think independently. But this is just a, a trend that I am seeing that is really surfacing online. And before we get into that, I want you to think of your voting experience as an experience at a restaurant. And so think about it. You're going to a restaurant where there's waiters and waitresses there, right? And so while you're at a restaurant, you have an opportunity to pick from a menu. And so this menu has several different items on it, right? And if those items are available, you are likely to pick from it, or maybe you will uh, go with the house's choice, or the restaurant's choice, or the waiter or waitress's choice, right? Sometimes, if you've been to a restaurant, you know that the waiter or waitress will recommend certain dishes, and you'll say, okay, well, maybe I'll try that. And so, if this dish is pleasurable, if it is satisfactory, what often happens is that you will likely return to this restaurant. And maybe if this waiter or waitress was, uh, you know, very courteous and attentive, what often happens is that you'll likely probably ask for that same waiter or waitress again. And so that's kind of how I would like for you to think about your voting experience, is that the elected officials uh, is this restaurant, or maybe this waiter or waitress is like the elected official. The restaurant is either the Republican National Convention, or the Democratic National Convention. So we have the Democratic National Convention on one hand, the Republican National Convention on another. And so it's important to think about your voting experience in the terms of what you can order from these elected officials. And if these elected officials bring will deliver your request in a timely manner, in a timely fashion, and if the dish is delectable and satisfactory, then you're likely to return and maybe vote for that elected official again, right? But on the other hand, if the elected official, uh, let's say, for example, there are some items that are not on the menu. So maybe you want something, but it's not present. And perhaps the service is really bad. And if the service is really bad, items are not there. And you're really not having a really uh, pleasurable experience, you're likely not to return to this restaurant ever again. And so it's really the same way when you think about the voter constituency and elected officials. If perhaps you don't have a pleasurable experience, or maybe there are items that are just not on the menu, you're likely not going to vote for this particular candidate, right? And so moving forward, I think that it's important for us to look at policy issues as table order issues, menu item issues. Okay, what's on the menu? Uh, this is on the menu. Okay, so if it's not on the menu, excuse me, if it's on the menu, do I like it? Is it pleasurable? If it's not on the menu, can I go somewhere else and get it? Right? And that's how we need to start looking at voting from this point forward. And so there are a lot of issues that have come up in several focus groups that have been conducted. And those issues are one number one issue that Black Americans have raised is inflation. Inflation has been a very serious concern for Black Americans. Black Americans have stated that they feel that there is just not enough money coming in, that there is uh, all of their money is going to the gas pump. If not the gas pump, it's going on the kitchen table. They have to choose between feeding their family or paying their bills. And we understand that in these situations, what's really more important is being able to put food in your child's stomach. And so there was a voter constituent, if you can see in this backdrop, she's wearing the pink shirt and she's in the front row. She was heartbroken that she was unable to feed her family, make ends meet, and it was all due to inflation. And this is what she said. She felt that this was all due to inflation in the United States. And so, one consistent trend that I've seen across multiple focus groups was the issue of inflation. And so, again, it was about paying gas because gas was very expensive, and then food was expensive as well. And then another important issue was that voters wanted restoration of rights for previously incarcerated and wrongfully imprisoned persons. And so we understand that in the United States of America, Black Americans make up roughly 13, 14% of the US population. Howsoever, they account for a large percentage of persons that are incarcerated. And of course, in this video, we're not going to get into statistics because we may cover that in another video. But for the purposes of this particular video, and just as we're bringing these statistics up, it's important to understand that voters are very concerned, Black voters are very concerned about opportunities at reentry. Opportunities at reentry. Is there a fair opportunity to reintegrate into society? Is that opportunity there? Because according to these constituents, that opportunity is really not there. There are collateral consequences that are stopping Black Americans from being able to get an occupation, being able to get housing, and actually to be able to vote their interest. And so you have these Black Americans that are disenfranchised in the United States and are really suffering from being disenfranchised and are seeking change. So that was another concern that was present in these focus groups. Now, the third Uh, the third concern that I thought was quite interesting, and of course, it wasn't surprising, was that Black Americans wanted sensible gun legislation. We can't figure out why that hasn't happened yet, but of course, this came up in this focus group. And I think for most Black Americans, when we think about gun violence in the United States of America, we often think about police violence, gun violence being connected to police violence, because in the United States, uh, there is a large percentage or a significant portion of the citizen population that is uh, impacted by police encounters, especially when they become lethal. So this was another really important concern for the Black American constituency. And so another concern was that most of the panelists in one particular focus group felt that elected officials just weren't taking their uh, vote seriously, that the Black vote was being taken for granted. And so, of course, we understand that Black Americans often vote, and sometimes they choose to vote for one party or the other, but they've been feeling lately that their vote hasn't been respected and that's been taken for granted. So I think that this is an important issue that really deserves attention from our elected officials in the United States of America. Of course, I'm not there, but I could definitely see how the Black vote has been taken for granted and why this is such a significant concern for Black Americans. So, another interesting uh, statement that was made at one of these focus groups was a gentleman said that he said that the United States should look in house instead of being the world's savior. Now, I don't want to actually opine on this statement because the gentleman that said this, he didn't actually elaborate on what he meant. And because he didn't elaborate on this particular statement, it's really difficult to really gauge what issues he was talking about that were abroad. So, for example, he just said world savior, but there could be some issues that are happening abroad that he supports, and maybe there are other issues that he does not support. He doesn't clarify that for us, so it's difficult to really infer or make an inference from this particular statement. And of course, I wouldn't want to because I really would want this gentleman to actually elaborate and tell us what he meant. And because he didn't do so, it's just really difficult for me to really give an opinion, an informed one at that, on this particular statement. But I just found that statement interesting. And so, lastly, was a statement that I think it really deserves or warrants contemplation for our elected officials. He said that it's almost like you're a villain. So, in one of these focus groups, this was the quote. He said that it's almost like you're a villain if you have a question. And if you have a question about a particular policy or why a certain policy is not being implemented or passed, or if you have a question just about your rights. And of course, there is some elaboration on this statement, and I'll link these videos in the description. But I think that that's a very important statement Because what happened to all questions are good questions, right? There's no question that's a dumb question. And I think that we need to bring that back. Questions, we should be able to ask questions and not only be able to ask questions, but we should also be able, we should also receive information as well. So, okay, if we're asking a question, then our questions should be answered appropriately. And so I can understand where this voter is coming from because I've often felt the same way in a number of places where I've lived is that I'll ask a question like, why is A like this? Or why is B like this? And oftentimes my questions will go unanswered, or there will be microaggression following that question, or there will be intimidation following that question, or bullying following that question, or uh, persecution. It's just a culmination of a pattern of oppression that shouldn't follow a simple question. You know, questions are there for us to answer. And if we ask questions and we're being treated unfairly because we asked a question, I think it's just uh, quite unfortunate. And so, lastly, I think what we should take from this, because of course, in these videos, all voters, although there were some similarities, the voters actually had some differences in what they wanted to change this election season. So I think it's really important for us to really reflect on that, right? Because a title of one of these videos is that we are not a monolith. And that's quite certain. Black Americans are not a monolith. So Black Americans, they don't think the same. We don't vote the same. We don't think the same. And because of that, our interests are different. But of course, there are going to be certain issues where majority of the demographic is going to come together and say, hey, well, this needs to be changed. And I think that one of those issues, or a few of those issues, is of course the restoration of those rights for previously incarcerated persons that are making attempts to reintegrate into society, uh, the gun violence issue that's happening within the United States. And as you know, I am completely against guns. I am a gun control advocate. I strongly believe that the Second Amendment should be revised, and that I think that that would keep most, if not all, Americans safer. But of course, there is not enough politicians in the United States that wants to do that. And of course, another issue is inflation. Black Americans are very concerned about inflation, very concerned about being able to make ends meet, put gas in the their gas tank, and put food on the table, and to be able to pay their bills. And all of this is quite distressing for the constituencies. So it's something to reflect on. It's something to really think about this election season. It's something for our elected officials to also think about. There are serious issues. These are, uh, of course, it's not an exhaustive list. So this is not a complete list of all of the concerns that Black Americans are, uh, you know, concerned about this election season. all of the policy issues that Black Americans have questions about this election season, but it's a barometer as to where the voters may vote and what they're looking for, right? So for example, if there is a big inflation problem that's happening in the United States, then the constituency is going to look for a candidate that's going to lower that inflation. And I do understand that the current administration has, or maybe there were reports that inflation has decreased. I think around 3% was what I last read, and uh, maybe that is significant. Maybe it's not. We don't know until, of course, November. But at any rate, this was just kind of a review of those table order issues that I've seen in a number of focus groups this election season. Please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I'm going to be doing a lot more analysis like this. And to subscribe, my channel is at Real Kiana Canada. Again, that's at Real Kiana Canada. You can also follow me on Twitter at Kiana_Canada. That's Kiana_Canada. I also have a Facebook. You can follow me there just by uh, clicking in my name, Kiana Canada. And we'll see you next time. Bye bye.